Hope everybody is doing well, enjoying the Memorial Day weekend and all along those lines. I actually had the pleasure yesterday on Saturday of going up to Mom's house up in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. She is celebrating her 82nd birthday. So her birthday was actually on Friday the 24th and all along those lines. But me, my aunt, my brother, as well as my two nephews and also some other family members went up there. It's about 10 of us and we enjoyed some good food. I know other people out there enjoying good food today. Maybe they're having a cookout or maybe they're enjoying other things as well. But I know in our case, there was a special on crab legs. So we grabbed some of those crab legs, enjoyed those crab legs, and definitely had that good meal and definitely, grabbing that nutcracker in order to get to the crab and all in that way. But it was some very delicious food. I think there was some corn and hen and, of course, some vegetables and corn and other things that were part of the meal as well. And, of course, Mom enjoyed the company. We were going to watch a movie, but unfortunately, we all got into conversation that we never really got past the first 5 minutes, maybe, of 80 for Brady. So I actually need to get to watch that show because I understand that it is a fun movie, and it definitely in the past, Malik, that's my younger brother, had watched it with Mom, and they had sat there just chuckling at these folks that had a major crush at the age of around 80 or something along those lines with Tom Brady, and they were trying to find a way to get to meet him and all along those lines. So it sounded like a fun movie, and definitely we got into some other activities like spinners, which is a regular game, kind of like dominoes that we do on a regular visit. And of course, there was all kinds of conversation, everything from Tetris coming up in the conversation to, of course, things like politics and other things. Because yes, in our family, we don't mind talking about politics. We don't mind talking about sports. We even sometimes might have conversations around religion and other things that you're probably not supposed to talk about. But we just got one of those kind of families that doesn't mind those kind of conversations and all along those lines. So even sometimes nutrition comes up and what we can do or can't do in terms of eating better and all along those lines. And I know I've got to do better because sometimes when I need to get out and get some food with the various things that I'm involved in, whether it's event planning or whether it's this broadcast in life or whether it's other things that I am involved in, sometimes it's like, wow, I'm hungry and I don't have anything in the house to eat. Even though one thing I can't say for Mom is that she sent some thing. She said basically said, "Hey, well, go look in the cupboard and anything that you want, grab it and take it on home." So I didn't like overly raid the pantry, but I did grab about 8 or 9 soup items and all along those lines, and they might be part of the dinner meals upcoming and all along those lines. But I'd be lying if I said that there might not be a possibility, including today, that I might not be reaching out to DoorDash and some of the other things that we do that aren't all that good for you and all along those lines. But I'm gonna bring in Randy Rolfe, who is my guest for today, and see what she's got going on in her life, how things are treating her. I know we had some rain here in Durham, North Carolina earlier, and there might be some more rain coming as well. We've also been having some hot and humid temperatures that come sometimes in May. It's definitely around in July and some of the other more summery months. But I think that spring, we kind of like bypass spring and jump right into summer, at least here in Durham, North Carolina. I don't know how it is in the part of the world where Randy's at and all along those lines. And by the way, that was the name of a late uncle and all along those lines, but definitely glad to see Miss Rolfe. And Randy was very much my uncle. Randy was into golf. And I just recently learned that my cousin, his daughter, or one of his daughters and everything, is now getting into golf herself. So my aunt was telling that they had a watch that was like a clever watch that would have different things that people are into. So I think for Uncle Skip, who was into fishing, it was the second hand was the fishing rod, and for the golf, it was like the swing of the golf and everything in that space. So as far as I know, even though she's been into basketball and other sports, I never remember cousin Tanya being into golf, but apparently with her own weight journey, because she's definitely lost a lot of weight and is definitely looking very slim and fit these days and everything. She is now getting into the game of golf as well. So definitely glad to have you here, Randy. And just really quickly before learning more about you, I do have to ask you because I don't know if you've got any kids or grandkids of your own and everything. But when I saw my two nephews and everything along those lines, there's this memo that they were supposed to get that they have not been getting, and I'm really upset about this memo. So I'm going to tease you and see if you've had the same reaction because I was talking to a close friend of mine and everything. But when they first are born, they are young and cute and all along those lines and everything. But as they get older, and my nephews will be 15 and 16, they wind up getting taller. So I think they're both taller than me. I think one might even be 6'2", and all along those lines. And I'm going like, I thought the memo was that you were not supposed to get bigger than your uncle. and everything along those lines. That rule has been broken, as it is oftentimes broken by many family members. Like I said, I don't know whether you are married or have kids of your own, but definitely I'm sitting there going like, I thought y'all weren't supposed to get bigger than me.
Yes, yes. My daughter's a little younger than me. I'm a little shorter. I mean,
Right.
a lot younger than me. Shorter than me. My son is a foot taller than me, and my grandson, his son, is also taller than me and still getting taller. And I have a granddaughter and two tiny grandsons as well. So yes, we're busy and they're all growing.
Yes, it seems like they
Definitely.
just grow constantly and get bigger and bigger, and all along those lines. So I'm going like, wait a minute, I thought that we could keep y'all short, and definitely shorter than us, but that's not the ways the rules work. They do that sometimes outgrow us. We were also teasing them because I do remember when I was a youngster. At one point, I have much less hair now, and it's definitely thinning. But I had like at one point the big afro type hair, and now apparently there is a new trend among certain youth, and definitely certain youth of certain ethnicities, about kind of like a frizzy kind of hair that goes up, and both of my nephews have that hair as well. So they were definitely getting teased about their hair might be entering the room before they enter the room, and I remember getting that same teasing when I was a youngster as well.
Well, we have Irish heritage and we have very curly hair. And my grandson, who's now 17, he's very short here, but he wears it very curly up here, frizzy. It's adorable. Yeah.
Yep, and that's kind of what my nephews were doing too. That kind of like up in the up frizzy, and definitely is a frizzy kind of style, and all along those lines. How did you first get involved in this whole space of nutrition, and all along those lines? If you want to share where you're at and where you're from, and even how you got involved in this whole space of nutrition, because I know a lot of times we are concerned, like I mentioned earlier, about nutrition, but sometimes we life gets in the way. We start ripping and running, and then sometimes as we are ripping and running, we don't pay as much attention as we should to our diet, and sometimes we are doing more concerned about the convenience, for lack of a better term, of the food than actually thinking about the nutrition value. Because, like I said, I know that there are a couple of restaurants that I eat out from DoorDash, some that are better than others in terms of their nutrition, but there are some that I'm going like, yeah, fried food probably not that good for me nutrition wise and everything. But sometimes it is quick and it's what's available via DoorDash and all along those lines. But how are we doing in terms of nutrition, and how did you get involved in the nutrition space?
Sure. Yes. Well, I love helping people that are trying to improve their nutrition and they've gotten into some bad habits because of short time and very busy and not having good sources and all those kinds of things. For me, I grew up in a rather privileged home, and my dad was a doctor and my mother was a sociologist, and we traveled every summer. So I had an experience of diverse cuisines from the time I was 9 on, and but we otherwise at home it was kind of a middle 20th century diet. Mom did, and dad cooked the meat, mom cooked the other stuff, and but I did have an uncle who had an organic garden and was quite famous for his organic garden. Scott Nearing, he wrote Living the Good Life and a lot of books about sustainable living and justice and all kinds of stuff. So I had talked with him and met him a couple of times, and also my other grandfather said that he he told us to peel the apples, and I was like, my dad doesn't tell me to peel the apples, and he said, oh, they're putting chemicals on the apples. Now this is back in 1958 or so. And he was already concerned about the chemicals on the apples. So that was kind of intriguing, but I kind of made fun of the people that were all into carrot juice and wearing sneakers all the time and kind of laughed at that. But when I met my husband in college and we were talking about getting married, I realized I had no idea how to cook. I was always studying and playing the piano and didn't know how to cook at all. I'd never watched my mother, my grandmother, or my dad. And so I thought, well, I've got to teach myself because I want to cook. I want to be the cook because I've had wonderful food all over the world. So so I taught myself to cook, but then I thought, well, I should figure out with Julia Child's book, actually. And then I thought, well, so what am I going to cook? So I thought, well, that ought to be easy. I'm a good researcher, daughter of a doctor. I'll just go to the library and get a good book on what it takes to keep you healthy for 100 years. Well, it wasn't so easy as I thought. There was so much confusion and misinformation and contradiction. And I was like, wait a minute. So I decided to really look into it. Meanwhile, I was in law school, and my first career was as a lawyer. But I realized I had so much fun teaching my fellow lawyers and then my law students when I taught at law school about nutrition, how to keep your brain working, how to keep your energy up for a tough exam or a tough court case. And so I learned how simple it was to actually eat real food. So that became my focus. And I was sharing every morning with my husband what I was learning from my research. And finally I said, I just want to start over. I'm going to throw out everything in our kitchen and start over with real food. Nothing else, no more white, no sugar, no clear oils, no salt, no white rice, no white flour. Just get rid of all the white. We need the color, the energy. And he said, great, because he had listened. Yay, because I help a lot of couples where one has no interest in it, and the other says, "Oh, but I want you to live forever." So that's how I got involved, and I eventually left law to write about parenting, actually, because I had a lot of parents asking me how to feed the kids and why we were doing so well with our kids. So my first couple of books were on parenting, but I always had a big portion on feeding the kids right, because then they have fewer problems, fewer allergies, fewer irritability and bad moods and poor sleep. So nutrition was the easy thing to do, and as a parent, just to keep everything healthier mentally and physically. So my most recent book is on the single ingredient diet, how to get rid of all the processed foods. Anything that has a whole long list of ingredients, just don't go there, and get one single ingredient food at a time. You can fix it any way you want at home, but just don't get all this stuff that has added fats and added sugars and added starches and added chemicals and added altered proteins. So I love teaching it, and I have a program now.
Yeah, a couple of things were crossing my mind as you were speaking, and I'll get to all of these questions that were running through my head and everything. But one of them was that you mentioned that one of your relatives was into sociology, and all along those lines, I know that sociology is the study of different societies and all along that kind of way and everything. So I just wonder, just in your own growing up, because you did mention your own Irish background and all in that space, but how much does your food taste governed by some of the things that your parents were researching? Because I'm imagining that you probably got to enjoy some various cuisines, including some cuisines that might not be all that common to folks because of one of your relatives being a sociologist. So just wondering, how much did that play in your own food journey?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually majored in sociology and international relations in college. And like I said, our diet was pretty much typical middle class, upper middle class American. But we did, in the summers, we learned all kinds of other things. And I did not know we were Irish until after I left the house, because my family grew up my mother grew up in Philadelphia at a time when the Irish were discriminated against. And so my grandmother tried to keep it a secret that any of us were Irish. And I didn't know it until I went to visit some Irish, some relatives in Canada. And he said that he went to Ireland every summer. And I'm like, oh, what's so special about Ireland? And he looked at me and he said, my dear, that's where our people are. And I was like, oh, because people had always told me, "Oh, you look so Irish, dark curly hair and white skin," and I'm like, "Oh no, I'm European," because that's what my grandmother told us. So it's a funny story. So we didn't eat many potatoes when I was growing up, and it was funny. We were trying to avoid the Irish, but I love it, and we do eat a lot of potatoes and oats and everything. But I also always encourage people to, when your ancestors have been eating a certain collection of food, that's so smart already. The culture has figured out what foods in their environment fit together and give you what you need. Otherwise, the group would have died out if they didn't feed themselves well. So I encourage people to really research their own ethnic background. I remember talking to a Armenian church, and I told the kids, ask your grandmothers what they cooked, because they've been around a long, long time, Armenians. And so they know how to combine the foods so that it works, but just start with real food. Avoid the chemicals and the polyunsaturated oils that have been overprocessed. But there's so much to be learned from the ethnic groups, because they weren't having bananas from Colombia and pears from China. They used the food that was local and made it all work together to keep them healthy. So that's a great question. Yeah, the ethnic diet is really important, and we're so lucky in this country that we can eat Italian one night and Irish another, and Chinese and Thai and Korean and Mongolian. But it's good to have the whole meal, not just one thing from this and one thing from the other, because they have over the thousands of years learned what works well with what. So thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. And along those same lines and everything, I know one of the things the network is proud of is they talk about education, meaning the network of PODTV, and what we are doing right or wrong in the education space and all along those lines. And growing up, I've definitely got some grandparents that I am proud of, but on both sides of the family. But my grandmother on my mom's side, so my mom's mother and everything, was a cafeteria worker, and all along those lines. And definitely they had lived in rural North Carolina, so definitely had some good products, whether it was corn or whether it was asparagus or a number of other products as well. And some of that would be brought into the cafeteria lunch and all in that space. But one of the things I noticed the pandemic was that a lot of people were sending food to the areas to make sure that the kids were getting some nutrition. And sometimes I would get frustrated because even though I don't have any kids of my own, I would sometimes see what they were given, and sometimes they would give them to the adults as well. And sometimes there would be some processed items within the items that they were given. So they might give you like some apples and other things that might be good, but then there might be some processed food that wasn't all that good as well. So I just wanted your take on, do you think that our school system is doing as strong as they used to do in terms of making sure that the nutrition value is being put into the food that our school kids are getting, whether that's in high school or in college? Because I know even back in my day in the late 70s and all along those lines, there was that whole notion of making sure that you had the different food elements, whether that was fruits and vegetables and even some of the dairy products and other things. And I think that through the course of time, we've learned that some of those things weren't as needed as much as we thought as they were needed as well. But I just wanted your take on how we are doing in terms of making sure that our young people are getting proper nutrition.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know just recently the current administration extended the school feeding to the summers, because so many kids in our country rely on the food meals at school, the school meals, that they decided to give a lot more food from the federal programs into the schools for summer programs. And some schools already did it, and a lot of charities were involved, but they're putting the federal behind that to get more good food to children. But we could certainly do a whole lot better as far as quality. There's a great deal of influence still from the giant food processing corporations to include certain things and make the processed foods cheaper so that the government will buy more of them, and a real focus on dairy, which isn't necessarily good for everybody. A lot of people don't do well with dairy foods. And a lot of it is still highly processed, that it's sweetened and white flour bread instead of whole wheat bread, and very few varieties of grains. And it's hard to get the fresh salads in there too. And then the schools complain, well, the kids don't eat it. They like the hot dogs and the macaroni. But I keep telling people that if kids are hungry, they will eat whatever is there. So if you keep putting out the processed foods, they'll eat it. But if you just keep putting out good food, they will eventually eat it because they're hungry. So we could do a whole lot better in schools. And I know some colleges have tried hard to have their own gardens and teach people about gardening and what a real vegetable looks like that's freshly picked. It tastes great. It's really green, that kind of thing. Just trying to teach people more about where food comes from and what it actually looks like, what it should taste like, and how much processing you don't really need to make it edible. So great
Is
question.
is it part of the processed food that is part of the problem, even with our academic environment and everything? Because I know that I could stand to get out and do some more exercise and definitely do better diet and all along those lines, and could stand to lose a few pounds of myself as well. But I do know that one of the stereotypes that exists, particularly for you lady folks, but it exists for men as well, is the notion of the freshman 15 or the freshman 20, where people are coming into a new environment, and sometimes the school options may be a little bit too tempting, and like you said, they may be a little bit processed, and of course you're under a new stress when you're going into the academic world. So I don't care whether it's like a university that you're associated with, Villanova, or actually y'all are a rival of my alma mater, which is Marquette, and all along those lines. So I don't care whether it's Marquette or Villanova, or even the schools down here like UNC and Duke and North Carolina Central University and the other ones as well. What is your thoughts around this notion that maybe even our college nutritionists are not doing that great as well? Because this is something I've been hearing about even when I went to school, and I know that some of my friends and relatives that have kids that are going to school, they oftentimes talk about the freshman 20 or the freshman 15 or whatever other terms that folks want to use.
Sure, yes, and they complain about having to pay for food that doesn't seem so good, and the kids go out to the food trucks instead. Anyhow, it is a problem of gaining weight. Partly just the lifestyle, different freedom, and like you said, the stress of going to college. It's a whole new world. So, and food's everywhere today. You don't just have to go to the cafeteria or the dining room. It's everywhere. And the dorms have machines, and and the friends bring in boxes of cookies and into the dorm. So it's just partly just a whole new environment where you have to realize portions matter, and how often you eat matters, and what you eat matters. They even had the COVID-15, that when people were at home and they could go to the refrigerator anytime, they put on 15, 20 pounds. So any kind of environmental change, especially when food's everywhere, and convenience and price are all involved, and taste. And these the food processors work very hard on making things irresistible taste-wise. They even call them hyper palatable. They're working on making their foods hyper palatable. So they've studied what stimulates the taste buds and it chemically, and they just put that in the food. It's not a food. It's just a chemical, but it makes you want the next one. next chip or the next cookie or the next bite of artificial ice cream, whatever it is. So everybody's vulnerable to that. If you just go by price, convenience, or taste, you're going to be gaslighted by the chemicals and the availability. But if you're aware of, if you trust your body and watch what's happening, if you see it's all going on around your waist or around your hips, then you do need to the first thing to do is just cut back on portions of processed foods, a little less bread, a little less gravy, a little less sugar. Just cut back on the things that aren't so good for you. It doesn't mean you have to give them up completely. Just keep them in their place, and so that you don't put on an extra 20 pounds or add 5 pounds every year or something like that.
Just along those same lines and everything, I know that I was watching Scott Galloway, and you were talking about some of the things that the drug companies are doing and how they are maybe even manipulating some of the things that we do in this space and everything. He was actually saying that one of the big investments coming up will not necessarily be around the notion of NVIDIA and some of the other products like that, even ChatGPT, but the biggest ones will be what I think he called GLP-1 drugs and all along those lines, because apparently they can help carve some of the cravings, and sometimes they might even stop us from having these cravings and everything. I think Lilly might have some of those products, even Glaxo and other drug companies may be working on them as well. But it seems like a group that it can stop our various cravings, including food cravings and everything. So as one that is in this nutrition space, what is your thoughts about this? And is this part of the drug companies also manipulating what is going on as well? So I didn't know if you had any thoughts around this, because like I said, I was watching a tape a couple of days ago and he was talking about this notion of GLP-1 drugs being something that are going to be the new economic driver.
Yes, it's shocking how much money will be just pouring into the coffers of the pharmaceutical companies that are making these medications. They say even just the one Nordisk, I think is their name. They said they're getting 25,000 new people on these drugs a week, and most of them cost about $1,000 a month. So that is a lot of money coming out in a month. And so it's irresistible to, and there was just an article this morning saying, oh, these drugs may help with your heart disease and diabetes. They were originally designed for diabetes, but they change the way your body handles insulin, and they bring down what they consider the markers of heart disease, like your blood pressure may be less and your A1C might be less. And so but they're usually talking about tiny changes, like, might bring down your risk by 15% of something that there's very small risk anyhow at whatever age you're at. So there's a lot of statistical games going on to convince people that these are just fine. What they're doing is most people's cravings are from poor digestion and poor metabolism. Because the body's not making steady energy for you, so you want to get some quick pickup from sugar or starch. So their answer is to mess up the digestion a little more. That does not make any sense. These drugs basically interfere with the normal healthy function of the stomach. And the most of the problem is in the gut, and starts in the stomach, but in the gut, the lower gut, with the microbes that aren't healthy. But what these things do, and they make it sound so good, it just extends the hormone that makes you feel like you're full. Well, that's not exactly what it does. It does all kinds of things to make that happen, including slowing down your stomach's digestion, interfering with the hormonal balance. And my dad, the doctor, said, don't ever fool with nature's balance. Hormonal balance is amazing. It's such a superior complex system. You don't want to mess with hormones. So what they're doing is they're interfering with the take-up of a hormone when it's done its job in the stomach, and it tells you you've had enough. But then they keep it going so that it slows down the digestion in the stomach. And some people end up where their stomach just doesn't even work anymore. The side effects, some of they're relatively rare, they say, but they're very serious when they happen. And when people get off these drugs, they continue to have GI problems for months or even years. So it's a medication, and medications are foreign to the body. They're manipulating the body. So if you can accomplish the same thing without medications, that's the first way to go. And cravings are only because you're up and down in your energy. So all you need to do is improve your diet so that you have even energy. And that means good quality protein 2 or 3 times a day, and not too much sugar, because that sends you on an insulin roller coaster. And don't eat processed foods that have you expecting this amazing stimulation of your taste buds every time you take a bite. It's chemical. It's like taking a drug. And in fact, the brain studies show that your brain acts like you're taking a drug, cocaine, for instance. You get this big zap or zinger. And if you want that again, you get addicted. And they know what they're doing. In the 90s, the tobacco industry became very active in processed foods. When they started losing the lawsuits about tobacco, they got out of the foods, and some of the cases have found notes saying we better get out of processed foods because they're going to catch up with us, that we're ruining people's health through changing their taste buds with our chemicals, because they'd done so much work on cigarettes to know how to make them irresistible with the flavorings and colorings, that they said, well, let's do this in the foods. But they divested their food companies in the early 90s when they realized that they were going to get more lawsuits. But then the food processors are like, well, we can do this. So now we have all the big processors.
But Randy, along those same lines, if I remember correctly, and actually my mom, who, like I said, I was honoring recently, celebrating her 82nd birthday, was the first president of the Golden Leaf Foundation, which is some of that tobacco settlement money that you were talking about, where they're trying to get people out of the tobacco industry and getting into other things. And she also, at one point, worked for the Smith and Reynolds Foundation and everything. But I do know that some of those companies, particularly some of those down here in North Carolina, but even some of the ones in Virginia, that they did go into the processed food market and everything. So I'm thinking that wasn't accidental, the merger between, say, an RJ Reynolds and a Nabisco, because that is actually what I think it is known now as, is RJR Nabisco, and they're definitely in the processed lane and everything. And there are other tobacco companies that have gone into kind of the sweets industry as well. So I'm thinking that was not an accidental plan, but was done intentionally. But I was just wondering your take on that and what your own research has found, because I do know that, like I said, if I was to go get some nabs, they'd probably be made by RJR, Nabisco, and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take on this maybe being intentional.
Yes. For a while, the General Mills and Kellogg and Nabisco were all owned by the tobacco companies. The New York Times did a huge expose about just right after my book came out last fall about this very thing. And then you're right in that area where all the big companies are. And my name is Rolf, who my husband's ancestor brought tobacco to this country. But back then it wasn't carcinogenic, and they didn't overuse it because it didn't have the radon, and they hadn't grown it so that it was so addictive they bred it so there was more and more nicotine in just a tiny bit. And if you've ever been to Williamsburg, you see those little tiny pipes. They do 1 or 2 of them a day. So and then it was just, we're in the pub or whatever. They didn't do it in the office or in the home. So anyhow, yeah, there's no accident there. Wherever they can make a buck, they will do it and hope they don't get caught. And that's the other thing that I love sharing from my law school experience, that had a wonderful lawyer who'd also been in the government. And he said that the big companies, they don't want to know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. All they want to know is how long can we do it before we get caught? Because if they can make 2 billion before they get caught and they get charged 200 million, that's just the cost of doing business. It's okay. They've still made, 80% profit. So so that's the way they think. And if a couple people die, well, that's just the cost of doing business. That there's always outliers, right?
Yeah. That's what they would argue and everything. And one of the other things that I know, you mentioned it earlier with the COVID-15, but I know that there are a number of other pandemics as well. One of our shows is called Where's the Love? And they talk about the pandemic. And I agree with them that it is a pandemic of bullying and all along those lines. But one of the other pandemics that we oftentimes hear about, and I've seen even in your own information sheet and everything, is this pandemic of obesity. And like I said, I know I could stand to lose some pounds, but apparently back in the 1980s, which is the first year that I went to college and everything, only 48% of American adults were overweight or obese, but now it looks like it's about 74%, with 42% being those that are obese. And it's apparently 50% of American adults now have one or more chronic diseases related to diet, and apparently 58% of the calories eaten by American adults are from ultra processed foods, which we've been kind of talking about in this session and everything, and 67% by the kids. So how bad is this obesity epidemic or pandemic, and what can we do to stop this pandemic if it's to be stopped in its tracks, much the way that we tried to stop COVID in its tracks as well?
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest question on the health horizon. And that's why these new drugs for obesity are getting so popular, but they've made it into a medical issue. But what happens is that if you think about it, it's really simple. Our body is designed to have a certain amount of muscle, a certain amount of stored fat. So that if we don't have a meal, we'll be able to use it, or if there's an emergency, we'll be able to use it. But when you have an extra 100 pounds, that is a burden on everything. There's no way to say, oh, I'm still healthy and I have an extra 100 pounds, because your body is aging extra fast because all your organs are overworked. So it's already a problem. Even if you feel great and you're taking walks, if you got an extra 100 pounds or 2 or 3, and it's a lot of people do nowadays, your body is being burdened in a way it was never intended to be burdened. So this idea that, oh, well, you can be healthy. The standards of health are relatively easy to match. When they say you're obese, it has to be pretty seriously overweight. A moderate weight is considered, for someone my size, 5'4", is up to 140 pounds. And for a man who's 5'9" or 5'10", up to 179 pounds. So it's not that hard to stay in that range. I'm certainly less than that, and a lot of people are. But so it's not that hard not to be considered unhealthy weight. But the problem is the processed foods, because and it all started in the late 60s, when the sugar industry convinced people that it was fats that were making them fat, and that it was fats that were causing heart disease, when it's actually sugar. And they knew that in the 70s, that it's sugar that is killing us with heart disease as well as diabetes. It's the cause of both. But the sugar companies, like the tobacco companies, who decided it was radon in our basements, not in the tobacco, the sugar companies did the same thing. It's the fats. And they paid a scientist to go and prove it. And there's lots of books now on the diabolical nonsense he put forth. But it's not fats. Fats are incredibly satisfying. It's very hard if you're only eating fats to get fat, because they're so satisfying. You're like, oh, enough. And so when you say fats, oh, but gram for gram, there are twice as many calories in a gram of fat as there are in sugar. But it's so satisfying that you're going to eat less calories if you're eating fats instead of carbohydrates. So it's the carbohydrates and the extra processing and chemicals that are seducing us and gaslighting us that are making us fat. Now, when we are eating the typical diet that you just said, the 58% highly processed, ultra processed foods, then our whole metabolism shifts. And that's what they call the metabolic syndrome. Your blood pressure goes up because the cells are resistant to insulin. They don't want any more sugar, so they resist the insulin. So the insulin goes up, or the pancreas stops producing it, or both. And then the blood pressure goes up because it's got to get that sugar out of the blood. The body protects the blood very carefully. It'll affect the brain if there's too much or too little glucose, as we know. When a diabetic goes comatose, you get them to the hospital or they die. So the blood protects how much glucose is in the blood. And when it goes up, when you have a bunch of cookies or a soda or a sweetened coffee, then the blood pressure goes up because it's trying to get the sugar out of the blood into the cells, and the cells are resisting. They've got their insulin resistance. So everything is messed up. And so what do you do? What does the body do? It's like, put it in let the liver change it into fat, put it into the fat. So then you're sitting there, well, where's my energy? Oh, my hips are bigger, but I'm still hungry. So it creates this metabolic syndrome, and the only way to change it is to get to real food, to stop eating the refined foods because they're just too easy to swallow. The sugar and the white flour products, they're too easy. You can eat way too many before you even know that you're full. So you have to break through that metabolic syndrome. And the problem we have as a nation is there's no vested interest in making people healthy. It's just not there. The people in charge of making what we call food, or food-like products, are not interested in health. They get most of their input from the chemical companies that are also producing the medications that take care of us when we're sick. So there's no one who's really looking for health. And even the governments are so corrupted by the powers of the lobbyists and the revolving door among the leadership of the corporations and the agencies that even our government that says, well, yeah, we want everybody to be healthy. Well, of course they do, but it's not going to happen because the agencies are too much under the control of those lobbyists and looking for their golden parachute when they leave government service. So it's up to us, is what it boils down to. We have to be educated. People like me have to educate people that their bodies are not meant to break down when they're 40. They can live healthy with a clear mind till they're 90 if they just give the body what it needs.
That makes a lot of sense. We've got a medicine show as well, and I was just wondering, it's called Medicine and Science, and I know that they sometimes even talk about the drawbacks within the medicine and all along those lines. But how much, because even where I'm based at, which is here in Durham, North Carolina, there is a one of our slogans is City of Medicine, and there are definitely companies like those pharmaceutical companies, but also hospitals, some that are for profit and some that are private, and definitely there are some of the ones that are public as well, and everything in that space. But in your mind, as one that's been doing a lot of this research and everything, how complacent are the hospitals and the medical establishment in some of this fight as well?
Yes, it's very disturbing because when I was practicing law at one of the big Philadelphia law firms, I was involved in a case where the doctors wanted to prevent their hospital from going to profit because, and this was right during that time when so many of the hospitals went from nonprofit to profit. Mm-hmm. And so there's a serious transference of incentive to where you want to be the hospital that has the finest diagnostic equipment and the highest paid surgeons, and it becomes a profit center to be diagnosing people with and doing an MRI at the drop of a hat, rather than saying, well, maybe you've just been drinking too many sodas this month, So, and which is often a big case of things happening. And so, yes, it's a very serious problem. And there are courageous doctors that are trying to encourage people to believe in their bodies and know that their body is always trying to heal. And if you give it the right foods and probably some supplements, if you're out of balance, that your body can take care of healing in ways that nothing coming out of a medicine chest can do, or out of a pharmacy. But obviously, medicine is amazing if you're in a car accident or you have any kind of acute problem, and it can keep you alive if you have a heart attack. But there are things you can do yourself to prevent the heart attack in the first place, or prevent the second one. Like, for instance, one of my favorite examples is that if you make sure you're eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, or taking a magnesium supplement, or all of the above, you can prevent your second heart attack. Magnesium is amazing. If you're taking it before that, you probably won't have a heart attack because it's so critical in the energy production and keeping your body from going into a stress reaction. And magnesium is one of the first minerals you lose under stress. So it's really important. And my dad, the doctor, I always like to mention it, he always insisted we have a banana every day because it's very high in magnesium and B6, which is kind of acts as a tranquilizer. So we said, oh, this will keep my kids calm if they get a banana every day. So there are definitely things you can do that will prevent the degenerative diseases. And I try to tell people that because the push among doctors and pharmaceutical companies is to prevent chronic disease by getting on drugs before you even have any chronic diseases. And so they promote this myth that, it just attacks you all of a sudden. And so we need to keep measuring you and finding it before it starts and that kind of thing. And we can prevent it with our new medications. But the medications because they're medications, cause side effects. And I try to tell that to everybody too, because the only reason you need a doctor to prescribe it is because it's a known poison. Drug people are called toxicologists, and they get a toxicology degree because they're studying toxins. So the idea is a doctor can help you decide that it's worth taking this toxin because the benefits are greater than the risks. But nobody's telling patients that anymore, that this is your decision. This drug is bound to cause side effects. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones that has minimal side effects and great benefits. And that's wonderful. But that's why your doctor has to monitor it, because you may not realize when you get these side effects that it's really from the drugs, because you haven't read the small print and your doctor hasn't read it in a while. So every drug is a potential problem for your body because it is a toxin. And that's one of the things that's so funny when you go in the drugstore and they say prescription strength without a prescription. Well, wait a second. Something does not compute in there. It can't be prescription strength and not need a prescription because it's toxic. And the reason it's prescription is that a doctor has to help you make that decision that it's worth taking the risk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What advice would you give for folks that are having these various cravings? Because a lot of times processed food will have you get these cravings and these addictions and everything. Even though I haven't had one today, I do know that I love my sweet tea, and I know that that's very sugary drink and all along those lines. And I know that there have been in the refrigerator and they're almost gone, some chocolate chip cookies. And I know that that's definitely sugar, which is not all that good. And I used to love a good graham cracker and all along those lines. So for folks that are maybe having similar type of addictions for different kinds of processed foods, but don't think that they can go cold turkey, because even those that are on alcohol and have other addictions, even sex addictions and other things, it is hard to do cold turkey. So for those folks that got to be weaned off of it before they can go totally cold turkey, what advice would you give them to make sure that they can slowly wean themselves off of these bad items?
Well, I think the best way is to start satisfying those cravings with real foods.
Right.
Like when you want to nibble something, put some peanut butter on a stalk of celery, right, or have a date instead of a chocolate chip cookie. Right. And then if you do have a favorite, like the chocolate chip cookie, eat it as a dessert after your meal. Don't right. use it as a snack. Because that'll put you up the roller coaster again. But if it's at the end of a meal, then your body's like, oh, okay, a little sugar coming in, but I got lots of protein and fat to work on. So to substitute real foods for your cravings, and like soda, just try to switch to water with some orange juice squeezed into it, or some diluted apple juice instead of a soda, or have Perrier with a couple ounces of apple juice into it if you want the fizz. So substituting real things so that your body has a chance of recalibrating itself. You really have to re-educate your body so that you get off of that sugar roller coaster and don't snack on those refined foods. If you must have them, then have them at a meal time when you're also getting a leg of chicken or pile of beans or something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everything. What do you say to those folks? Because I was actually having a conversation with one of my coworkers here on the PODTV, and they were trying to remember, and I was even trying to share it with my family members, but the name is not coming to me and everything. But there have been a number of documentaries that might get you to totally change your mind about even eating certain foods, and once you find out how the foods are manufactured. And I know that Barbara Smith, who's one of our co-hosts, was talking about a recent Netflix documentary that has totally got her on the vegan train because of what she saw in the way that the food was prepared and all along those lines. And I can't think of the name of the documentary. I want to say Poison might be part of the title or something like that, but I know it's a recent documentary, but I know a lot of other folks will see that documentary will definitely impact them very quickly, but then they'll go back to their old habits and all along those lines. Like some of these documentaries may automatically have a impact and maybe get people to change their lives and everything. But the other complaint that I hear about healthy living is that sometimes, and I do sometimes get my produce box, and I have definitely attended uh, Whole Foods and some of the other restaurants and grocery stores that are known for being healthy, but sometimes they are nicknamed whole paychecks because sometimes they can be more expensive than some of the more mainstream ones. So, what is your advice for those folks that want to live healthier, but then they look at some of the healthier living costs and are going like, well, that's a little bit more expensive than I want to spend, and all along those lines?
Yeah, I just got that question again recently. What I like to say is that if you don't buy a whole lot of the processed uh, snacks and beverages, then you save an awful lot of money, and your organic stuff may be at 10-15% more expensive, but not always today, because like in Whole Foods recently, the farmed salmon was more expensive than the wild caught salmon, because they're convincing people, well, farmed is safer for the environment. But the farmed salmon it has to be colored, because it's not eating what salmon usually eat, and so it's not naturally colored. And it's fed antibiotics, because it's fed all kinds of awful stuff instead of what it's supposed to be eating in the wild. And so some of the farming operations are more costly than the real foods. So the other thing that is even more important as far as price is it's been decades since either my husband or I bought anything from the drugstore except maybe toilet paper, but no kinds of drugs or remedies. We don't need them because we're always healthy. And same for my kids. They just don't need over-the-counter drugs. So for lots of people, that is a major piece of their budget. They have Contac on hand and aspirin on hand and all these other things that I don't even know the names of. But I know people are taking them. Sleep medications, wake-up medications, energy drinks. So you save all of that. That can all go towards your quality of food. And in transition, maybe you still need something to put you to sleep or something, but you'll soon not need it if you're really nourishing them yourself. So price is an argument. And I've had people say, oh, well, yeah, there are food deserts where in poverty areas where they just don't have quality. They don't have produce. It just never makes it into those neighborhoods. But you can still get dried food and go out of the neighborhood once in a while, or order online now. You can order online, but there we have a societal problem. We need to do something about food deserts. It's ridiculous. All our people should at least have food. But as far as your average middle class worrying about the price and with inflation, I hear a lot about that oh my gosh, it's more expensive, but you're paying for chemicals that are toxic for your body. So it becomes a priority question. You'll do much better if you keep your mind and your body healthy than if you are spending less, but you have to get medications. You have to go to the doctor because you've got kidney stones. So they come from energy drinks, but nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
So you have to look at the bigger picture when you're realizing, okay, my food might cost a little more, although I think if you get rid of all the processed stuff, it'll be less. But you have to think
along those same lines, how much of, because you mentioned the food deserts, I'm also wondering how much of the things that are done intentionally and all along those lines, because I know that I've studied and have been a student for years around gentrification and even some of our historical Black Wall Streets and things along those lines. And a lot of times they were destroying neighborhoods. They were actively minority communities. And I would argue that there might be an intentionality in putting a churches or a KFC or even a certain bodegas in certain minority communities, because you know that that is a market that is already craving for food, and it might be easier to get them with the fried food and some of the things that are not necessarily good for you by putting some of these franchises in those neighborhoods. So I'm thinking that sometimes this may be done intentionally. I don't know if you agree with me or
Yeah,
not.
yes, I think there's a lot of evidence for that, and there are really two sides of it. First, that it can be a great market for the high profit foods, which are the highly processed foods. You make more profit from that neighborhood, unfortunately, with the really poor foods. But then there's also a way of starving the neighborhood so that it can be urban renewed. And like you said, gentrified, it gets cheaper and cheaper. So then someone can come in and say, oh, I'm going to develop this. So it's making profit while it's going downhill, and then coming in and making more profit. So I think there's a lot of evidence of that.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that and everything. Now, one of the restaurants that I do go to sometimes, because it is one that I enjoy going to because I like their diet and everything, and it is definitely priding itself on its Mediterranean roots and all along those lines. So it is a Mediterranean type restaurant and everything in that space. So I know that you have sometimes, even in some of your own research, talked about the Mediterranean diet. And I was just wondering, is this a diet that more of us should be going towards and all along those lines? Because like I said, I know this particular restaurant that I go to, and I usually get one of their kebabs and maybe even a good salad, and all along those lines is very Mediterranean oriented, and they do have some fruits, because I'll oftentimes get the fruit with the meal as well. So how important is this Mediterranean diet, and are enough of us actually participating in a Mediterranean diet as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can get very controversial, because that the idea of the Mediterranean diet goes all the way back to some of those tests that said, oh, it should be plant-based, and it's the fat, not the sugar. I've been in the Mediterranean many times, traveling with my parents and since, and it's not just plant-based. First of all, they eat lamb and pork and fish profusely, but not like beef every meal. They don't do that. So we don't need to do that. But the Mediterranean diet also, they eat lots of butter, olive oil, cheese, very much so, and fatty fish. And so it's not like they avoid fats either. The real secret to the success of a Mediterranean diet, like Greek food, I could live on that forever, is lots of fresh vegetables. They often ferment and pickle vegetables when it's out of season. Lots of fish and whole milk products, the yogurt and the butter and the cheese. It's always whole, but it's local. It doesn't have a lot of additives. There's very little chemicals in a traditional Mediterranean diet, because it's local foods. It doesn't need to be preserved unless you want to ferment it or pickle it, or dry it, cook it. So the main thing about it is that it's whole, real foods. That's when it works. It's whole, real foods. So when most restaurants that claim to be Mediterranean, they tend to give you what you expect, in a Mediterranean spread, a little, what's it called? Souvlaki, combination of beef and lamb, and lots of antipasta kinds of things, and then wonderful cheeses that are locally made. And yes, you're going to do very well on that kind of diet. But if it's all of a sudden saying, oh, this is plant-based, it must be Mediterranean, then, you've gotten off the rails.
Yeah, got off the rails and everything. I know that sometimes a lot of people have been concerned, and it's something that I know even friends of mine have dealt with as well. How much of a problem have we run into in terms of nutrition with the whole notion of lactose intolerance and everything in that space? Because I do have some friends of mine that are lactose intolerant, and ironically, even though I don't have any currently, I have had pets in the past, and there used to be this notion that one of the popular pets, that being cats, were supposed to love milk. And now recently studies have shown that a lot of cats are actually lactose intolerant, just like a lot of humans are lactose intolerant. So they'd rather have a glass of water to lap on versus the milk that some of the humans want to give them because of the stereotypes. I was just wondering, is part of this the change in our diets that has made us more lactose intolerant, and is it impacting our friendly companions as well, whether that's a cat or a dog or whatever other pets that people may be having as well? So I'm wondering, is part of this rise, because it does seem to me that I hear more people talking about their lactose intolerance than I used to, but maybe that's just because I'm paying closer attention.
Yes. Well, I have a whole chapter in my book, The Single Ingredient Diet, about milk. The main thing is that milk it's one of the most highly processed foods around. And we've added chemical vitamins to it to try to make it more like what came from the cow, but it's been homogenized, pasteurized, and now some of it's been high heated. And now they're talking about using a fast pressurized milk. Instead of using heat, they're going to pressurize it. And then we've got all these different levels of fat. So we've removed the fat. It used to rise to the top. Now we homogenize it. So it's little tiny particles. So it gets treated completely differently in the liver. So it causes problems there. And the people of Asian descent just did not develop with fresh milk. Except in Mongolia, they used horse's milk and cow's milk right from the cow. So when my kids were little, we lived right down the street from a dairy in northern New York, and I breastfed my kids for 2 years. But after that, they had fresh milk, and I was drinking fresh milk straight from the cow. That was yellowish because of all the butter. In fact, sometimes I made my own butter. And that's completely different from what you're putting on the floor for your cat. If it came straight from a dairy, your cat would still love it. But there have been studies, actually 50 years ago, there were studies of cats to see what happened with fresh milk versus pasteurized milk. And by the third or fourth generation, the cats were infertile and didn't like the milk. When it was fresh milk, the fifth generation was perfectly happy. And I know in the dairies where we were living, there were always cats in with the cows. The cats just lived on what was spilt when they were milking the cows.
They were milking the cows and everything. That makes a lot of sense that they would get that leftover milk and all along those lines. But yeah, I'm just sitting there going, like, I know that I've been seeing more even humans dealing with this whole notion of lactose intolerance more than I had seen before, and all along those lines. And like I said, I heard this stereotype about what was good for animals and what wasn't good for animals, and this wasn't the cats, it was the dogs as well. But it's good to know that there are definitely some good things that can go on even in terms of natural food, and that's what it seems like you're definitely a proponent of, is just getting more of that natural food and everything. But I'm also wondering, because we were talking earlier about fast food, and one of the scariest incidents that I ever saw is I sometimes don't think that we think about where the food is coming from and all along those lines. Like, we assume that it is what it claims to be and everything in that space. But I remember a dear friend of mine, and I actually need to reach back out to him just to be a good friend and a good neighbor and everything, because it's been a minute since I've talked to my buddy Steve Hyman and everything. But I remember many years ago when he was much younger himself, and I think that he had, yeah, at that time he was married to his wife, and then is still married to, and all along those lines. But I remember that he went to a auction, and it was an auction for a horse and all along those lines. And while he was there, he happened to notice that there was one of our popular fast food restaurants that was there as well. So that told me that there might have been some auction items that they were thinking was beef that might not actually be beef and everything, because it seems like they were trying to get the horse. And I do know that sometimes people will substitute one product for another and everything along those lines. Like there might be people that are thinking they're eating one meat and they might be getting venison, which is a form of deer and everything. But I just remember being a little bit startled when he told me that story several decades ago, because I'm going like, wait, because I even asked him, I said, well, are cows being auctioned as well? He's like, no, no cows. It was a strictly horse auction, but apparently maybe Hardee's was trying to get some other product other than masqueraded off as the cow. And like I said, this was several decades ago, but it definitely startled me when he told me that tale.
Well, I have heard that it happens, and we try to regulate that in this country, but that we don't give our agencies much money for frequent inspection.
Right.
So it can happen. And there have been a lot of stories lately that, you may think you're getting cod, but it's really tilapia,
Right.
and things that are, they may substitute in the back room in a restaurant, and you're not sure. I one time got terrible stomach ache from food poisoning at a upscale restaurant at a museum.
Wow.
In Milwaukee, I think it was. And I had asked for a tuna sandwich, and it didn't taste like tuna. And I said to my husband, this doesn't taste right. And he said, well, send it back. But I didn't. I said, oh, it's okay. It just tastes more like beef. And that night, I was just absolutely miserable. And the next day, we were driving across country. I heard on the radio that there had been a disease in the beef in that city. And I realized that's what I had. I had been exposed to that beef in that stupid, what was supposed to be a tuna sandwich. So I still don't understand why they put the beef in the tuna sandwich, unless they think I asked for beef, which I didn't. But anyhow, it can happen, and it can be awful.
It can be quite awful, particularly if that's not what you're expecting. Like if you're thinking that you're going to get a Big Mac or something else, and you wind up getting a totally different animal and all of those. I noticed that in one of your things that you had sent me and everything, you mentioned a fairy tale or a story that I definitely have enjoyed, whether it was the African American version or the other version, which is The Wiz. So whether it was The Wizard of Oz or The Wiz, that starred definitely some amazing stars as well. But you were saying that we could learn some lessons from those characters, whether it's Scarecrow or whether it's the lion or a number of others. So I was just wondering if you could share with our audience what you meant by that story and everything. Because when I heard that, I have to ask Randy about this, because apparently we can learn something from The Wizard of Oz and the characters that we all know and love from that particular story and everything. So I was curious as to what are these lessons that we can learn from this particular story that many of us know.
Yes, it's great fun, because actually the man who wrote the original Wiz books had really studied the classic characters back from ancient Greece, the classic 4 characters that Shakespeare used and dramatists have used ever since the Greeks. And so he made characters representing those. And we now know, and I discovered it, and I've written a book on it in my nutrition class, that those 4 classic characters actually correspond to hormonal dominance in our body. So each of us, when we're under stress, rely on different hormone systems like the type A personality that's aggressive, and when they're out of sorts, they'll get really domineering. That's the lion. They want courage, and they're dependent on the adrenal glands, and they're gung ho, but then they usually collapse quite early in the evening. They're tired, they're worn out because they've had their adrenaline flowing all day. Then Dorothy is the phlegmatic type, what they used in ancient Greece, they called phlegmatic, and they depend mostly on the post-pituitary gland when they're under stress, and they're very loyal and very caring about home. They love family, home, loyalty, that kind of thing. And she always wanted to get home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was so happy when she was surrounded with her family again. In fact, in her adventure in the tornado, all the characters were her old friends, the good characters. And then the straw man is the melancholic, whose moods change a lot. They're very dependent on the thyroid gland, and that's what puts you on the roller coaster, the sugar, because thyroid is very responsive to sugar. And then so he wanted a brain, and the melancholic people are very much in their brain. They get depressed. They can be life of the party, but then they collapse. And so that was that. He wanted a brain, which he obviously had, but he didn't appreciate it. And then the Tin Man is the fourth group that relies on basically the gonads, the sex hormones under stress. So they tend to eat late at night, kind of the aphrodisiac pattern, and they're all about passion, the heart, and he wanted a heart. But the sex glands are interested mostly in fats and like cream cheese and I didn't say the Dorothy people can get hooked on milk and fruit, but the romantic people get hooked on like cheesecake and potato chips and ice cream, creamy things, creamy, crispy things. And then the straw man, they, like I said, with the thyroid, they like the sugar. They'll go for the caffeine, which is a stimulus to the thyroid. So caffeine and sugar, chocolate, all that group of things, they're most addicted to that. So it's a fascinating thing. You can kind of say, well, which of those four is more attuned to you? Which one do you resonate with the most? And you can learn so much about yourself with that. And then you can look at other friends and your family and see who is what. Because in any group, like the Beatles or the four women in Sex and the City, or any group of four, if it's successful, you will have each of those people represented. And that doesn't mean that they're actually playing up to their character. So that's the problem. It might not be their actual character.
Yeah,
but
I have to go back and watch that movie. I have to go watch that movie I was talking about, 80 for Brady, because I want to say it was 4 women in that. I know that most of those women have passed on, because I know Sally Fields was one of them, and there was Rita Moreno, and I forgot the other 2, but definitely I want to say that there were 4 women and 4 strong women. And I'm also imagining that there might be some people that are, because sometimes we don't like to admit that we all have a feminine and a masculine side of us, and there might be guys that are afraid to admit that they would be more of the Dorothy, because as you were describing the type, that definitely seems that more that would fall into my lane and everything. But I do know that some guys that will be like, I can't be Dorothy. I'm not a Dorothy because that's a woman's name. And all along those lines, because you do have some people that are stuck in their stereotypes and all along those lines. And just really quickly, I've got about another 15 or 20 minutes to go and everything, and I hope you can give me that much time and everything along those lines. But how much does some of these food cravings and some of the things that you are researching, because you kind of alluded to it in that last answer and everything, because I sometimes know that even though I'm in that single space and have been all my life now in my early 60s, that sometimes we wind up using food as a substitute if there's not things going right in the relationships, whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship. And we all know that sometimes people even maybe even head to the refrigerator after their sexual encounters and all along those lines. So and sometimes even use it as an aphrodisiac to get to the sexual encounter. So how important is food and the nutrition in terms of our overall wellness and our overall kind of life balance?
Yeah, that is a great question because the food affects our moods. Our brain is an organ just like any other, and how we feel can be very much affected by our diet. And aphrodisiacs do actually work. They stimulate the sex hormones, the ones that are traditional, and sugar does make us more life of the party, or wine, or things that have carbohydrates in them. And the advertising industry actually plays on that to encourage us to satisfy our emotions with food. Mm-hmm. So they'll show some guy in a bar frustrated by his date just left, so he has a beer, right? Mm-hmm. Or a guy's sitting high on a construction site and he pulls out a soda or a box of cookies or a sugary candy bar because he wants a big break, and this is his big break. Instead of maybe reading some poetry or singing a song with his friend, he's going to eat sugar. So it's really encouraged by the culture and the advertising. And then you read about it, it's discouraged, don't eat out of emotional need. So the main thing there is, again, to eat real food and try to keep your energy even, because if your brain's getting steady energy, you're not going to have as exaggerated emotional responses. You will be able to think. You'll be able to say, okay, that was something nasty he said, but I don't have to take it personally. Or, gee, that was really fun, but I don't have to celebrate it with a big bowl of ice cream. Right. So you'll feel good without feeding some hormonal system more than it needs to feel good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know one of the other things you talked about, and I know sometimes people think about it in the sense of life and death and everything, but that's not where you are going with it. But when you are talking about the four horsemen of the dietary apocalypse, what are the four horsemen, and how close are we all to a dietary apocalypse? Because I know a lot of people are concerned about just the real apocalypse and whether that's coming or not and everything. And I consider myself more spiritual than religious. And like I said, I'm hoping that Mom will make it to 100. And I've jokingly said that I'd like to get to 200. And I wouldn't mind if Mom made it to 200 as well. I know that's not really a realistic goal, but hey, sometimes it's just fun having the goal. And, maybe when I get to heaven's gates or all along those lines, I can say that I didn't really think that I'd make it, but at least it was fun saying that I was going to try to make it and everything. But what is the four apocalypses of this the four horsemen of the dietary apocalypse?
Yes, well, I'd say that it's first of all the refined sugar and even sugar substitutes, so that they are gaslighting our taste buds and making us. Now we have sweet beers and we have sweet wines and we're making everything sweet, and our coffee isn't coffee anymore. We're putting a dessert into it. So it's really gaslighting us into thinking that we need to eat every 2 hours and we're always thinking about food. That is not the normal way. If you go into a traditional society that is hunting and gathering, even they only eat once in a while. Once a day, they all get together and share their food, and they gather it all day. So it's not necessary at all to do that. But anyhow, the refined sugars and the white flours, and then the polyunsaturated fat, they have altered our diet so tremendously with the high omega-6 compared to the omega-3 fatty acids. And the good fatty acids are almost removed from the polyunsaturated fats. We should be eating real fats, and we should not be scared about cholesterol or saturated fat. That was all made up back in the 60s so that we wouldn't blame sugar for our problems. But sugar is the problem. And then convincing, the other reason they did that was because the food processors were figuring out how easy it was to use polyunsaturated fat in everything. So corn oil, soy oil, canola oil are in every processed food, and fried foods are all in those cheap oils, and the body's just disgusted by it, made sick by it. There's definite problems to show that it's causing, cancer as well as a whole lot of other things. So the refined foods and then the chemical additives are the third, and absolutely awful. And then the let's see, that we've got the sugars, the starches, and the altered proteins is the fifth. People don't realize that we are over processing our proteins as well. Soy protein has been altered so many different ways, and it's in so many foods because you can manipulate the soy protein into any form, and now they're doing it for so many substitute vegan foods, and people that don't want wheat, they're making all kinds of things out of soy and avoiding gluten and wheat and any kind of meat. So the pastas, the breads, the buns, they're all processed. They can change the consistency with soy and the oils. So the vegetable protein, they often call it hydrolyzed vegetable protein. It's not just like, oh, they got a little soy in there. Soy is very dangerous. It has a lot of estrogen-like compounds in it. And the Asians figured out how to detoxify it. So unless it's tofu and miso and properly fermented the old way, it still is estrogenic and can cause cancer, obesity. If you're eating a lot of vegetarian and there's a lot of soy in it, it can cause obesity because it changes the hormones. So those are the four. It's the carbohydrates, the refined carbohydrates, sugars and white starches, and then the polyunsaturated oils and the altered proteins and all the chemicals. So those are the four. You just want to avoid them completely.
Yeah, definitely. Like you want to avoid those and everything. You mentioned something else that I think that is one of the reasons that I love going up and don't go as much as I probably should to Mom's house and everything, is this notion of communal gatherings and everything. So how important is that to nutrition and everything? Because I think that we've gotten away from that, and I sometimes, even when I do go out to eat, and like I said, I do that way too often, but I do get frustrated when I see an entire family out in an outing and everybody's on their individual cell phones, having their own individual villages and not really engaging with each other and everything. Because one of the things that I love doing when I'm going up to Mom's or any of my other friends' houses is we might play a game of spinners, or we might play some other gatherings, and there's lots of good conversation, including topics that supposedly are not supposed to be talked about at the dinner table, but we don't mind doing that. And I know every family has their own rules and regulations, but we are very open to having those kind of conversations and everything. But I was just wondering, how important do you think it is to have that kind of that communal gathering? Because I think that's what some societies do better than we do in the West.
Yes, I do agree with you. When I traveled, I met families from all different points, and my family always ate meals together. And in my work with parents, that's been a major thing. I've found that more and more parents are not eating with their children, and they'll say, well, my kids just snack, they don't even have a meal. And I remember the first time I said to parents, well, have they ever seen you have a meal? And I remember she said, well, no, I eat breakfast after they leave in the morning, catch the bus, and I eat dinner quietly after they've had dinner. And I said, well, that's why they don't eat dinner. They don't know there is such a thing. You
Right.
know, they say, oh, I don't want that. And then they'll munch on other things until bedtime. So, um, so it's really important to have meal times, but that communal social part is incredibly important. And I tell parents to not give any lectures about nutrition at the dinner table. Make it fun, social, what's new, what's the latest joke you heard, any funny news, or ask a question about some news story. And my family talked about everything. And I think it's really important to have a family or a group of friends where you can talk about anything. But over a good meal, there's nothing like it. It is very congenial, but it also teaches you to enjoy your food, that it is a social thing. We love being social. We love eating. Why not do them at the same time, And gathering together, it's really important. And COVID was very hard in that respect of not getting together with your friends. And of course, the worst was when you had somebody in the hospital, you couldn't even visit them. I still think that was inhumane. But anyhow, we need to gather at our meals. And we had in the 80s and 90s, that was another thing that went wrong for the obesity epidemic, was this, oh, well, we can graze just like the other primates in the forest. They're pulling at this fruit and pulling at this nut and picking up this insect, and they're just eating it. But the anthropologists that have studied the human species say that's one of the things that's especially unique about us humans, that we are more like birds, and we bring our food to the family.
Right.
And because we have such long childhoods and long old age, we take care of our children and our elderly. So us able-bodied people, we gather the food, we bring it in, we share it with the kids and the elders, and that's where we develop our language, our facial expressions, our compassion, our understanding, actually our sense of life. Okay, we started as a little one, we're going to be this old one. It's where we learn how to be a human.
Yeah.
So gathering our food together is and sharing it is essentially human.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's also a good time to reflect on those that have gone on, because even when I was with Mom, we were thinking about it, like some of the things, like I think I mentioned to you, and even on this show, the whole thing with the golf watch and the fisherman watch. But we were also thinking about Uncle Bud, who was one of my great uncles who had some amputee situations. I don't think he was missing one arm. He might have been missing both arms, but they were talking about how he was able to do a lot of things that folks would not think he would be able to do, including driving what at that time was a stick shift car and all along those lines. So they were admiring what he was able to do with his determination to do it and all along those lines. And there were some other folks that had passed on as well as some of the folks that are here as well. Because I know they were also talking about a cousin that is living in California and is possibly thinking about moving this way. And they were also thinking about how they never had any desire, certain family members, to go to the West Coast, even though there are a few family members out there, not a lot, but there was just a good conversation point in that space, both those that had passed on as well as those that are still around, and just sharing some of that news, even talking, like I was talking before we got on, to a cousin, and I was realizing that her mother is about to have one of her kids have a child. So that'll be like her, I think, fourth great grandchild and everything along those lines. And I remember her when she was young, before she had her kids, and I don't think she was ever thinking about being a grandma. And I know she was being a great grandma. So, that's a part of that aging process, if you're fortunate enough to have the kids, and then the kids may have kids and those kids may have kids. So maybe aren't planning it, but I think that this will be her fourth one, if I heard the family dialogue and everything. But one of the things I've been hearing about, and a lot of people say that we should and we shouldn't. So I just wanted your thoughts, because I mentioned that earlier when I was growing up, there was this notion of trying to have food that fed into one of those various food groups, whether that was vegetables, whether that was fruit, whether that was grain, and a number of other things. And there was also this notion that you need to have at least 3 meals. And I know that I am notorious for not having breakfast. I usually will have lunch and dinner, but I'm notorious for not having breakfast and everything, even though when I'm at mom's house, we definitely do have breakfast, because she is a breakfast believer and all in that space. So how important do you think it is to have 3 or maybe even 4 meals if you're going into that late night snack or that dessert kind of time as well? So is it all right to only have 2 meals, or should we be trying to have the 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the very least?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of people do ask it. As I said earlier, we aren't supposed to be eating every 2 hours. We're not grazers, and we actually to digest a meal, we do need at least 3 or 4 hours between meals. And I mean, you can have a few little berries or some cereal if you feel. Some celery if you need a little pickup, but you probably wouldn't need it if you had real meals. So whether 2 to 4 is possible, the late night meals I definitely don't recommend, because you don't want your digestion still working while you're asleep, because your digestion needs relaxation and a recalibration of the hormones and the enzymes that you use. They are doing work elsewhere during the night to rebuild, to rejuvenate your body. So you should have not be eating anything for 2 or 3 hours before you go to sleep. So you should finish eating by 7:30 if you're going to bed at 10. And it's important also because if you eat late at night, you're not going to digest that well. So you're not hungry at all for breakfast. And breakfast is an important meal. But you can break your fast anytime. But the idea is not to eat a whole lot of sugar or stimulants first thing, because some people say, oh, I don't have breakfast, but you find out they have 2 cups of coffee or they have a donut or something, and then they have a big brunch later. So when you break your fast, there should be some protein and some fat in that first breakfast. So the eggs and toasting or eggs and bacon is fine, as long as it's organic, not nitrated bacon, the real bacon. But you can also, if you're vegetarian or vegan, you can have oatmeal and almonds for breakfast. So that's fine too. But oats are the highest protein grain, so that's why I mentioned them. And almonds have wonderful protein in them. So if you get up at 7, say you've had 9 hours sleep, if you don't eat anything till 10, that's fine. In fact, my great uncle with his organic garden, he would do all his writing from the time he woke up to breakfast, and his wife would make wonderful oatmeal breakfast, but he didn't eat for 3 hours because he was doing his writing. And I understand, because I often have very creative putting ideas together as I'm waking up in the morning. And so I can really see going and just spending a couple hours writing stuff down. And I have done that occasionally. But we usually eat within 90 minutes of waking up. I love breakfast, so we have a nice breakfast. But then we only have we have a very small lunch, maybe a green drink or a piece of cheese, and then we have dinner. So you really want to see what works for you. So if you're doing fine on 2 and you don't feel big snack attacks, that's fine. And if they talk about intermittent eating, which just means stop the snacks and don't wake up in the middle of the night and eat. But they try to make rules about it that, it's got to be only 9 hours of eating. Well, I think that's ridiculous. We aren't robots. We don't have to go by the numbers. We aren't ruled by numbers. They're just helpful for demographic graphics and business, but we really don't need them unless you're counting fish when you're fishing or something. But as far as how we live and how we eat, it's not about the numbers. And so many people are trying to measure whether they got enough hours of REM sleep, or have they taken enough steps, or have they had enough calories. You're being less human by doing that. You're not listening to your body. And
Being less human and everything, if we eliminate it, because you kind of alluded to it very earlier on in the conversation, but I would think that if you eliminated thoughts around food and you eliminated thoughts around sexuality, that there would probably be a whole lot less thoughts. Because I'm thinking that the average human is probably spending anywhere from about 70 to 80% of their life with those two thought patterns and everything. And I do know that a lot of times we get into these addictive habits and all along those lines. So do you think that I'm far off base? Because I know a lot of times if you talk to people, they are usually, and maybe you can add sports, because a lot of people are very much into their sports and political discourse as well. But I think that if you added those as maybe some outliers, that is probably the majority of the thoughts that people are going through, because they're thinking about what are they going to have, what are they going to do when they sleep, and maybe their sexuality, and then there might be some thoughts around sports and politics and maybe what the latest entertainers are doing as well. But I do think, and even some of those thoughts are sexual and food oriented, because if you're going to a show, you're going to be eating. It might be like coming to the Carolina Theater, everybody talks about how great the popcorn is, and all along those apparently they have some popcorn that people are big fans of, and all along those lines. And even if you come to the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, sometimes they will have some drinks that are out and available as well. So they might be thinking about the poets, but they're also thinking about the drinks that they might get from one of our local breweries that sometimes set up a stand there as well.
Yes, no, I think those are very normal, very human, and very life. It's about life. Those are what we do in life. Is we socialize, we play with each other. Sports are playing, and when you just do the numbers, it loses. I mean, there's a whole lot more to watching and enjoying sports than the numbers, and it gives you something to talk about if you know some of the numbers, and I get that. But it's you don't want to be dependent on the numbers. Just realizing that the numbers are distracting from knowing whether you really feel good about your diet, and are you really hungry. There are very few people that know what hunger really feels like unless they are, economically disadvantaged. And so it's when we delegate to a machine to tell us what's true about us that I draw the line. I mean, it's fine to think about, I've already thought about, we're having some friends for dinner. I know what I'm going to cook. Right. And I think about how many people are there, how much do I need, and that kind of thing. But I see it as a creative process. It's the numbers are very incidental to it. And same with, how many times a week do you have sex? Well, that's not the point. Are you enjoying each other?
Right.
And how many games did you see? Well, you might have missed some, but that's okay. You still love it. So and how many meals do you have? The best thing is to have a routine that works for you. You don't want to have, one big meal a day on the weekend and then 6 little ones during the week. Your body is going to be totally confused. So you want to have a routine that works for you, and figure it out using whole foods, because your body is lying to you if you're relying too much on the processed foods.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Just really quickly, and this is the last couple of questions that I ask usually most of my guests in general and everything. But how do you deal with that work-life balance? You've mentioned a couple of times having that husband and the kids and now grandkids and everything, and all of these various things that you're doing. I'm imagining that the work-life balance has to be a challenge. And I was just wondering, what do you do to maintain that work-life balance?
The describing that issue is it already forms a certain expectation a problem to solve. Where in my own life, I've never seen it as a problem to solve. I remember when I was writing my first book, my son was in first grade and my daughter was sitting in the floor in front of me. And every couple hours, when she kind of looked like she was getting a little bored, I'd go down and sit and play with her and talk with her. And I actually mentioned one of her remarks in the book. But it's called "You Can Postpone Anything But Love," which is my philosophy. So if you're expressing love, if you're not sure what to do, think, what's the most loving thing for me to do right now? And sometimes it's tough love, but it always is a good guide. So I think of doing what I feel is the appropriate thing to do. And I found a routine that works for me. So I don't really feel a conflict. We have a long morning, we have a long evening, we do a lot of talks, we talk to our kids. And when we had kids, it was a lot busier. And most of the time, at least one of us was working at home. And we actually homeschooled our kids for most of the years. And so there was always somebody at home and in charge of their studies at any particular time. And we found from them that they only really needed 3 hours a day of the reading, writing, arithmetic type stuff. Right. And the rest of the time, we encouraged them to learn, to go explore. And I remember my son read a 400-page book about putting cars together. And I thought, oh, what difference does that make? What it's about if he's reading 400-page books. So, and my daughter was reading stuff about anthropology and earth science. So it's really about feeling your own way. What makes it a really good day for you? And again, having a routine that works for you and not feeling a constant conflict. And I know women who work out of the home, and men too, they're like thinking like, oh, my baby wasn't feeling good this morning, I shouldn't have left them. And when they're at home, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't get that project finished. And I've been there, I know what that feels like. But trust yourself that it will work out. Just do what feels right at the time.
Yeah, trusting yourself is very important in everything. The other thing that I talked about on this show, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this really quickly, is how do you deal with that inner critic? Because I know that sometimes, whether it's the imposter syndrome, because it's also known by that name, and I'm thinking that even when you were writing your book, there might have been times that you went through that yourself, so you're going like, nobody really wants to read this book, nobody's going to listen to this book, nobody's going to pay attention, and all along those lines. So what advice did you get, whether it was from your husband or other people that are in your inner circle, that got you to get out of that inner critic? Because I know even in my own life, there have been relationships that I have talked myself out of, and there have been jobs that I've talked myself out of because I was too busy having that inner conversation. And by the time I got around to talking myself into it, the dating opportunity had left, or the job opportunity had left as well. So I just wondered, how have you dealt with that inner critic, and what advice were you either given or would you give to others?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think anybody that has a sense that they have a gift to give, that they want to share, has that. Like, wait a minute, I don't have the degrees, or I don't have the experience, or I don't have the smarts, or something like that. I think we all feel that at some point. And the way I've overcome it is, first of all, with any kind of thing like that, is just to accept it. Like, okay, that's my thinking. All right, so I'm sabotaging myself. And then you usually, if you can step back from it a little bit, then you can say, well, but wait a minute, I have this passion. I don't have a passion for no reason, that I want to share this. It must be worthwhile to somebody. And just keep giving it until I find the people that want to listen. And so I think the idea is to realize that it is self-sabotage. It's because you're afraid of being as great as you are. I had a wonderful friend long ago. He's passed, but he said that when you're really close to your goal, the devil pops up. And he said that things get really tough when you're really close. So, and Paul Simon has a song about that. You know, the closer you get to it, the more it slips away. So just realize that that is your own inner critic, and sometimes you just have to walk over critics.
Yeah.
And the people that really succeed just walk over them or around them. Don't listen to them. And if you have people that are really hanging around you all the time that are saying, well, who do you think you are? Try to limit your time exposure to them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you have to know who your tribe is, and if they're not part of your tribe, like you said, you got to let them go, and all along those lines. So I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know we were supposed to have had this a while back, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think the audience has as well. I've been watching, so we've been having people watching as we've been talking, and I'm sure they'll be watching them in team rerun as well, and all along those lines. But one of the things I get all my guests to do is a couple of quick things, which is the Pod TV is an international network. So kind of my own rule and my own thoughts around that is that I love being a conduit for positive thought. So I give all of my guests to give an opportunity to share a message of positivity that they would like to share with our global audience and all along those lines. And of course, give an opportunity to tell how they can be contacted and reached as well. And if there's anything that we didn't touch that you wanted to touch on, this is the opportunity to do that as well. So I'll give you the chance to answer that question, tell how you can be contacted, and if there's anything that you didn't get to touch on that you would like to touch on, then we can do that. And then we'll go out with the same robot that we went in on as well and everything. But like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you'll come back in the near future on another show as well.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been a delightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Wonderful questions and fun talk. And you offered so much too. Well, I'll just go back to you can postpone anything but love. When you're in a situation, just what's the loving thing here? And when you can step back and just say, okay, what can I do coming from love? And if someone's been nasty, just say, wow, you're having a bad day. Don't engage. Just it's true. And especially with parenting, and that's when it came to me that I was leaving a job and I was so excited spending more time with my kids. And I said, well, you can postpone anything but love because they'll be 20 very soon and I won't have as much time with them. So now's the time. So you can postpone anything but love. And my website is randyrolfe.com. So everything's on there, RANDY, ROLFE. So you can find everything there. And I also am on Facebook. I have a number of pages on Facebook. I do regular videos on Vibrant Health Through Natural Living page on Facebook. And I have a group called SingleIngredientDiet.com that's all about my book, my newest one. But all my parenting books are on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. You can also get them through my website, randyrolfe.com.
Sounds good, and we'll try to add them because we have a bookstore that's part of Pod TV as well. And I know that a lot of the guests, I tried to direct them to their Amazon accounts and everything along those lines. So I'll definitely be trying to add that so that folks can learn about your books through the bookstore and everything along those lines. Because that's something that we have that's attached to our website and all, but it is attached to Amazon and in that space. So hopefully there will be some people watching and we'll get some revenue for you from them learning about it through the Pod TV bookstore and all along those lines. Because I know a lot of our past guests, both on this show as well as the online dinner party, and others have been on there. And I love that attitude about positivity as well, because that's actually something that my friend Barbara H. Smith talks about, which is that a lot of times if they're versus getting caught up in the negativity and trying to like spread more negativity and everything along those lines, just think about it in a positive light and don't even deal with the negativity is kind of how she goes in that space, because a lot of times we can drown ourselves in negativity and it can actually cause negativity to come back on us is kind of what she was saying. And I agree with her in that space there. If there are people that are being negative towards you, or that you are experiencing negativity, either get them out of your circle, but don't try to fight negativity with negativity, because it doesn't end well.
Right. It can just escalate. Well, thank you so much. That's wonderful.
No problem. Like I said, we're going to go out that robot that I said we started with and ended with, and all along those lines. So we started with it and we'll end with it as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, I might be reaching out to you to see if you want to come on our new show, as well as some of our other shows, including some of my other ones like the online dinner party. But I do love having guests that are even multiple guests as well. So I might reach out to you and see if you're available later on in the spring or summer. And of course, we can continue this conversation. But I learned a great deal from you, and I definitely enjoyed our conversation.
Sure. I love that. I love radio and TV. Oh, I always have. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'd love another one.
Sounds good. So right now we're going to head on out.